Mr. Zuckerberg, do you think Canada has made a mistake entering the trade war with the infamous US? I need your take on it.
We shouldn't be surprised to see the federal government utterly unprepared for Washington's wrath towards its trading partners. Few details were given on the government's plan to deal with NAFTA's possible demise on Washington's America First policy, and there were no attempts to circumvent trading challenges. The ugly face of protectionism is slowly making its way across the globe. US President Donald Trump announced last week he's considering new trade restrictions, including a 25% tariff on imported steel and a 10% duty on aluminum. Though the White House has suggested Canada and Mexico may be exempt from the measures. Nonetheless, trade wars are something Trump appears to relish. Despite recent trade deals signed by Canada, the world seems at odds with open trade, and instead everyone wants to protect their own domestic markets. This is a seemingly dangerous path given that agriculture and food are often considered the most vulnerable and sensitive sectors when it comes to trade barriers. They're easy targets. Tariff or even non-tariff barriers can make a significant dent in a country's economy almost instantly, and consumers are often affected the most.
Canada is about to join a trade war it can't win without any public debate over whether there was another opinion. They gave importers a few weeks to review the list of US goods they intended to tax starting July. The first one, they asked for no input on the overall strategy. This is what they had to say. Canada had no other choice but to retaliate, Freeland said in French at an event hosted by the Montreal Council on Foreign Relations on June 20. But of course the government had a choice. Sorry, sir. Can you see it now? But of course the government had a choice. It could have litigated the US duties at the World Trade Organization, as it is doing, without applying retaliatory tariffs. Might have minimized the disruption to overall trade and commerce. Now let's welcome the very famous Rachel Zane, who got her degree from McMaster University in poli-sci. She's very well respected around the city of Toronto, so let's get an insight on what she thinks on Canada and the US trade war, and could that trade war really sting Canada and Canadian businesses?
Hi, my name is Rachel Zane, and it's an honor to be here with Mr. Zain Masood today talking about Canadian trade war. So, Canadian businesses are digesting the industry ramifications of the cross-border tariff war that erupted on Thursday, with Trump announcing the U.S. will slap tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum prices. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau firing back with $16.6 billion worth of dollar-for-dollar countermeasures on goods ranging from playing cards to maple syrup to yogurt. The 10% tariffs or similar measures on selected U.S. imports are set to take effect July 1st after an industry consultation period. Part of the 10% levy at the wholesale level may eventually be passed on to Canadian consumers in the retail price if the tariff war persists.
Wow, you've answered that so intelligently. That's actually something that I've constantly been thinking, that these tariffs and these things, I feel like Canada has put themselves in a place where it's become harder for them to compete with the US now. But there's something else I wanted to ask you, Ms. Zane. It was that, what are the provinces that are most at risk from the protectionist type? Thank you.
With US tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum in place, and Canada planning to retaliate with tariffs of its own starting in July, we are now officially in a bit of a trade war. Only a bit though, because as trade experts will tell you, it could be much worse. For now, the war will only affect a small portion of the Canadian and US economies. We are not in an all-out, full-blown trade war yet. All the same, some parts of the country will feel the sting more than the others. According to an analysis from National Bank Financial, Ontario and Quebec have the most risk from Trump's tariffs. At the risk of oversimplifying, Steel is an Ontario story and aluminum is a Quebec story. Of the $7.4 billion of Canadian steel that was exported to the US in the past 12 months, almost 80% came from Ontario. Of the $11 billion of Canadian aluminum shipped to our American neighbors, Quebec supplied roughly 2/3. NBF carried out an analysis earlier this year on the parts of Canada most at risk from a Trump-led trade war. They looked at which Canadian industries were being targeted by Trump's protectionist rhetoric and then combined that with the data on which industries are most dependent on and which ones stand to have high tariffs if Trump cancels NAFTA.
What an incredible response. But there's one question that I need to ask you, Ms. Zane, and it's very important. Because this question deals with one of the most controversial leaders in our time. His name is Donald Trump. Do you think Trump's trade war is undermining the US?
Donald Trump seems to be getting the trade war that he so obviously wants. Canada resisted being drawn into that kind of destructive cycle for as long as it could, but Trump's decision to slap tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum backed this country into a corner. Invoking national security as the ostensible reason.
Okay, let's start again.
Invoking national security as the ostensible reason for the measure only adds insult to the injury. The tariffs are also being imposed on imports from the European Union and Mexico, so that the Trump administration has decided to go to economic war with its closest allies and trade partners. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was right to strike a harsher tone in reacting to this pointless Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was right to strike a harsher tone in reacting to this pointless step. He has gone out of his way to make nice with Trump, even when the US administration first waved around the threat of tariffs back in March. But at some point, a line must be drawn in the face of measures that Trudeau called totally unacceptable. The national security excuse for the tariffs is transparently thin. It is, on the face of it, absurd to invoke such a reason in relation to the United States' closest economic partner, especially when two countries' metal industries are intertwined. As Trudeau noticed on Thursday, Canadian steel and aluminum are built into U.S. fighter jets. The idea that depending on Canada for metals is a threat to American security is farcical. More to the point, the Trump administration is openly linking the new tariffs to what it sees as Canadian and Mexican foot-dragging on talks to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. A week ago, Trump was rumbling that Canada is very spoiled and very difficult to deal with on trade, and his Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, publicly decided that slow NAFTA talks as a reason for slapping on the tariffs. That makes it clear that all this has zero to do with national security and everything to do with the Trump administration leaning on the United States' traditional allies to get its way to bigger trade issues. The response to that has to be, get lost. Canada resisted rising to the bait when the tariff threat was first invoked and managed to kick the can down the road. But now that the measures are real, the Trudeau government can hardly avoid replying with dollar for dollar tariffs of its own array of American goods. It's a self-destructive cycle that will hurt businesses and consumers on both sides of the border. But failing to respond would send out a message of weakness, and faced with a bully like Trump, that will just invite more attacks. At this point, it's clear that Trump administration has made a remarkable hash of the NAFTA talks. It has presented Canada and Mexico with a series of unacceptable demands that served only to stiffen spines in both countries. And the window for a successful renegotiation is closing quickly, with the presidential election fast approaching in Mexico and politicking in advance of U.S. midterm elections complicating matters in Washington. The Wall Street Journal describes it all as a looming fiasco that could backfire on the president by alienating groups that should be his allies, like business and farmers who depend heavily on trade. Ultimately, some sort of trade deal may be well salvaged. In the space of a few days, remember, Trump whipsawed from canceling his Korean summit with Kim Jong-un, back to planning the very same meeting. Who knows what reversals may be coming onto NAFTA? But even if that happens, his erratic, hostile behavior toward the United States' traditional allies is undermining Washington's credibility. Oh my god, I can't speak anymore.
Credibility,
I can't speak anymore. Credibility around the world. On that front, the damage has already been done.
Now I've talked to Professor Rachel Zane and I've talked to Professor Zuckerberg. They both pretty much had the same idea.